The bright lights of Sterling and Associates office building cut through the darkness of the quiet night. Sarah Johnson pulled her cleaning cart out of the supply closet at exactly 10:00 p.m., just as she had done for the past 3 years. At 42, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her dark skin glowing under the fluorescent lights as she moved through the empty hallways with purpose. Tonight was like any other night, but Sarah felt particularly tired. She had spent the afternoon helping her daughter Lisa prepare for an important law school exam before rushing to catch the bus to work. Still, she smiled as she thought about Lisa. All of this, the late nights, the aching feet, the endless floors to clean, it was all worth it to see her baby girl chasing her dreams. The 32nd floor of Sterling and Associates was always her first stop. The executive offices required special attention, and Sarah took pride in making sure every surface sparkled. She adjusted her navy blue uniform, straightened her name tag, and began her routine. The sound of her comfortable work shoes, squeaking against the freshly mopped floor, was her only companion. As she worked, Sarah thought about her own studies. Few people knew that after finishing her cleaning duties at 5:00 a.m., she would head home, catch a quick nap, and then spend several hours studying for her online business degree. She was just 2 semesters away from graduating, though she kept this achievement in progress private. Sarah believed in letting her work speak for itself. The office belonged to Richard Webster, the new head of operations who had joined the company 2 months ago. Sarah had noticed him working late several times, but he never acknowledged her presence. She remembered their first encounter. She had smiled and said, "Good evening, sir," but he had walked past her as if she were invisible. Since then, she made herself scarce whenever she heard his expensive shoes clicking against the floor. Tonight, as Sarah carefully dusted the awards and certificates hanging on the walls of the executive floor, she noticed something different. A small family photo had appeared on Richard's desk, a perfect-looking wife and 2 children smiling at the camera in front of what looked like a beach house. Sarah gently lifted the frame to dust underneath it, taking care to place it back exactly as she had found it. The sound of voices from the elevator made her pause. It was unusual to have anyone in the office this late, aside from the occasional security guard or fellow cleaning staff. Sarah recognized Richard's voice immediately, accompanied by another man's laughter. Not wanting to intrude, she quickly gathered her cleaning supplies and moved toward the supply closet. But she wasn't quick enough. Richard rounded the corner with his companion, another executive she had seen but didn't know by name. They were engaged in what seemed like an amusing conversation until Richard's eyes landed on Sarah. His expression changed instantly. "Oh, look who we have here," Richard said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Our nighttime ghost." He chuckled, nudging his companion. Sarah kept her head down and continued collecting her supplies, her hands steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. Years of experience had taught her how to maintain her composure in such situations. "Good evening, Mr. Webster," she said politely, her voice clear and professional. "I'm almost finished with your office." Richard made a show of inspecting his desk, running his finger along the surface. Finding no dust, he frowned slightly. "Well, I suppose even simple work can be done well," he muttered, just loud enough for both Sarah and his companion to hear. Sarah wheeled her cart toward the door, maintaining her dignity. As she left, she could hear Richard beginning to say something else, his words carrying a mocking tone. She didn't stop to listen. Instead, she thought about the business management textbook waiting for her at home and about Lisa's upcoming law exam. Success, she reminded herself, was the best response to prejudice. In the quiet of the elevator, Sarah took out her phone and opened her Notes app. She documented the interaction, including the time, date, and the name of the other executive present. Something she had learned to do over years of facing workplace discrimination. She didn't know if she would ever need these notes, but experience had taught her the value of documentation. The night was still young, and Sarah had 7 more floors to clean. She straightened her shoulders and pushed her cart out of the elevator on the 31st floor. Whatever Richard Webster thought of her, she would continue to do her job with excellence. After all, she wasn't just a cleaner. She was a mother, a student, and a woman with dreams much bigger than the gleaming offices she maintained. A week had passed since Sarah's uncomfortable encounter with Richard Webster. The autumn night was cooler than usual as she pushed her cleaning cart out of the elevator onto the executive floor. The clock on her phone showed 11:30 p.m. She was running a bit behind schedule because the 31st floor had needed extra attention after a large meeting. Sarah pulled out her headphones but didn't put them in her ears. It was a habit she had developed over the years. Keeping the headphones out made it look like she was listening to music, but actually allowed her to hear everything around. As she began her usual cleaning routine in the executive area, she heard voices coming from Richard's office. The door was partially open, and light spilled out into the darkened hallway. Sarah recognized Richard's voice immediately, along with two others, men she had seen at the office but didn't know by name. "I can't believe they're making us take that diversity training next week," Richard was saying, his voice slightly slurred. Sarah could see empty wine glasses on his desk through the gap in the door. They must have been celebrating something. "Well, after what happened at the Denver branch," one of the other men started to say. Richard cut him off with a loud laugh. "Please. These people are so sensitive nowadays, you can't say anything without them crying discrimination." Sarah's hand stilled on the handle of her vacuum cleaner. Her phone was in her pocket, and with slow, deliberate movements, she pulled it out and opened her recording app. Something her daughter Lisa had taught her to do. "Mom," Lisa had said, "sometimes you need evidence to make people believe you." Speaking of which, Richard continued, his voice getting louder. "Did you see our cleaning lady? The one who looks like she walked straight out of a housing project." Sarah's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady as she pretended to organize her cleaning supplies, keeping her phone partially hidden but its microphone pointed toward the office. "You mean Sarah?" one of the men asked, sounding uncomfortable. "She seems nice enough." "Oh, sure. She's nice enough," Richard mimicked. They'd all tried to act nice and proper. But did you hear her talk? "Good evening, Mr. Webster." He imitated her voice in an exaggerated, mocking accent that sounded nothing like how Sarah actually spoke. "Probably thinks if she acts polite enough, we'll promote her to CEO." The men's laughter echoed through the empty office. The one laugh sounded forced and uncomfortable. Sarah stood perfectly still, her phone recording every word, every laugh, every moment of humiliation they thought she couldn't hear. "And have you seen how she's always reading something on her breaks?" Richard continued. "Probably some romance novel. These people love to pretend they're educated." Sarah thought about the business management textbook in her locker, about her 3.8 GPA, about Lisa's proud face when she made the dean's list last semester. Her fingers tightened around her phone, but her face remained neutral, a mask she had perfected over years of dealing with people like Richard Webster. "I don't know, Rich," the uncomfortable voice spoke again. "Maybe we should call it a night. We've had enough wine." "Oh, come on, Mark. Don't tell me you're getting soft," Richard scoffed. "Next thing you know, you'll be telling me we should pay them more. For what? Pushing a mop around? My 10-year-old can do that job." Sarah had heard enough. She stopped the recording and carefully saved it, immediately sending a copy to her email and to Lisa. Then she walked to the other end of the floor and started the vacuum cleaner, making her presence known. The voices in the office quickly hushed. A few minutes later, the three men emerged, Richard barely glancing at her as they passed. But she noticed Mark, the uncomfortable one, giving her an apologetic look. She filed away his face in her memory. He might be useful later. After they left, Sarah cleaned Richard's office as thoroughly as ever. She picked up the empty wine glasses, noting the expensive brand. She straightened the papers on his desk, including a memo about next week's mandatory diversity training. As she worked, she began forming a plan. That morning, after her shift ended, Sarah didn't go straight home. Instead, she sat in a 24-hour diner and wrote down everything she remembered about the incident, while it was still fresh in her mind. She noted the time, the date, the names she knew, and the approximate amount of wine they had consumed on company property after hours. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah opened her phone and looked at the recording. 18 minutes and 45 seconds of clear, damning evidence. A small smile crossed her face as she remembered something her grandmother used to say. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, baby. Sometimes he lets folks dig their own graves. All you have to do is hand them the shovel." The next evening, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with Lisa, both of them hunched over a notepad. The recording from last night played softly from Sarah's phone, making Lisa's face grow darker with each passing minute. Mother and daughter had already listened to it 3 times. "Mom, this is serious." Lisa said, her law student instincts kicking in. What he's doing isn't just mean. It's workplace harassment. She pulled out her laptop and began typing quickly. We need to document everything properly. Sarah nodded, reaching for the small notebook she'd been carrying in her uniform pocket for the past week. I've been writing things down, she said, sliding it across the table. Times, dates, what was said, even the names of people who were around. Lisa's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages. Her mother had always been organized, but this was impressive. This is good, Mom, really good. But we need more. For the next hour, they created a proper documentation system. Lisa set up a secure cloud folder where Sarah could upload recordings and photos. They made a spreadsheet to track every incident, no matter how small. Sarah even drew a simple map of the office floor, marking where each interaction had taken place. Remember, Lisa explained, highlighting something on her screen, discrimination cases aren't usually one-on-one big incident. It's about showing a pattern. Sarah thought about Mark, the uncomfortable executive from last night. What about witnesses? She asked. Perfect. Lisa nodded. But be careful how you approach them. Don't let Webster know you're building a case. The next few nights at Sterling and Associates took on a different rhythm. Sarah still cleaned each floor with the same care and attention, but now she was watching, listening, and gathering information with purpose. On Wednesday night, she noticed Richard making similar comments to a young Hispanic security guard, Juan. She pretended to be cleaning nearby, her phone recording in her pocket. After Richard left, she approached Juan carefully. He speaks to many people that way, she asked quietly while emptying a trash can. Juan looked around nervously before answering. All the time, especially to the night staff. He hesitated, then added, I've been keeping track too. They exchanged numbers, and Sarah added Juan's experiences to her growing documentation. She learned that Richard had denied Juan a security supervisor position last month, giving it to a less qualified white candidate instead. By Friday, Sarah had spoken with Maria from the cleaning staff and Raj from the IT department. Each had their own story about Richard, and each was willing to write it down. Lisa helped her collect their statements properly, making sure they were dated and signed. The following Tuesday, Sarah was cleaning the conference room when she overheard a conversation between Richard and the HR assistant, discussing how he had changed the requirements for a promotion specifically to disqualify a black candidate. Her phone recorded everything while she quietly mopped the floor outside. That weekend, Sarah and Lisa spread all their evidence across their living room floor. 2 weeks of careful documentation had yielded 6 audio recordings of Richard making discriminatory comments, written statements from 4 different employees, a detailed log of 15 separate incidents, photos of relevant documents and emails, a timeline showing Richard's pattern of behavior. Mom, Lisa said, looking at everything laid out before them, this is more than just a few racist comments. He's actually affecting people's careers. Sarah picked up one of Juan's written statements, remembering how his voice had shaken when he described losing the promotion. That's why we have to do this right, she said firmly. Not just for me, but for everyone. Lisa helped her organize everything into a professional-looking folder, making copies and backing up all digital files. They included relevant company policies that Richard had violated and state laws about workplace discrimination. The key is to be professional, Lisa advised. Present the evidence calmly. Don't make it personal, even though it is. Make it about company policy and the law. Sarah nodded, thinking about her next step. The HR director, Helena Roberts, had a reputation for being fair. She would be the right person to approach first. As she prepared for her next shift, Sarah felt different. The weight of Richard's words was still there, but it was lighter now, transformed into purpose. She wasn't just documenting abuse, she was building a case for change. In her bag, along with her usual cleaning supplies, she carried a small USB drive containing all their evidence. Remember what Grandma always said, Lisa told her as she left for work. Sometimes the best way to clean house isn't with a mop. The night shift at Sterling and Associates had always felt like a different world, but now it felt like a community coming together. Sarah stood in the break room at 2 a.m., surrounded by 5 other employees who had stayed after their shifts to talk. Juan, the security guard, had brought coffee for everyone. It's not just us. Maria whispered, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Remember Thomas from accounting? He quit last month because of Webster. She pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a text message from Thomas, describing how Richard had consistently excluded him from important meetings and client presentations. Michael Torres, the night shift supervisor, leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. He'd been quiet during most of the conversation, but his expression showed growing concern. "I've been here 15 years," he finally said, "and I've never seen someone create such a hostile environment so quickly." Sarah took careful notes as everyone shared their experiences. Each story fit into the pattern she had already documented, adding weight to their case. But more importantly, she noticed something happening among the group, a sense of hope replacing their usual resignation. "Webster has a meeting with the Tokyo office next week," Raj from it mentioned, adjusting his glasses. "He always stays late those nights because of the time difference." He paused, looking meaningful. "He tends to be less careful about what he says when he's tired." Sarah understood the hint. She had noticed the same pattern. Richard became more openly discriminatory during late hours when he thought only the invisible night staff was around. Later that night, as Sarah cleaned the executive floor, she found an unexpected ally. Karen, Richard's executive assistant, was working late organizing files. When Sarah entered to empty the trash, Karen didn't ignore her like most day staff did. "Sarah," Karen said quietly, checking to make sure they were alone. "I've been wanting to talk to you." She pulled out a manila folder from her desk. "I make copies of everything, including emails. Some of these," she hesitated, "some of these might be useful to you." Sarah's heart beat faster as she glanced at the contents. Emails showing Richard had changed job requirements specifically to exclude minority candidates. Meeting notes where he had dismissed qualified diverse candidates with vague excuses. Even a formal complaint that had mysteriously disappeared from HR's files. "Why are you helping?" Sarah asked, carefully copying the documents with her phone. Karen's face hardened. "My daughter married a wonderful man last year. He's black. Richard met him at the company Christmas party, and," she trailed off, her hands clenching. "Let's just say I've been documenting things ever since." The alliance with Karen proved invaluable. As Richard's assistant, she had access to information that painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination. She began marking her calendar whenever Richard made inappropriate comments, providing Sarah with exact times and dates. Michael Torres also stepped up his support. As night shift supervisor, he had authority to adjust cleaning schedules, ensuring Sarah was always assigned to the executive floor when Richard worked late. He also began including notes about Richard's behavior in his official shift reports, creating an official record. One night, as Sarah was reviewing all the evidence with Dwan and Maria in the break room, they heard footsteps approaching. Everyone quickly scattered, but it was only Mark, the executive who had shown discomfort during Richard's wine-fueled rant. Mark stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. "I've been trying to figure out how to approach you," he said to Sarah. "What I witnessed that night, it wasn't right, and it wasn't the first time." Sarah stayed quiet, letting him continue. Lisa had taught her that sometimes silence was the best way to get people to keep talking. "I've been taking notes too," Mark admitted, pulling out his phone. "Times, dates, exactly what was said. I'm willing to go on record about all of it." By the end of the week, Sarah had built not just a case, but a support network. The night shift workers had created a subtle system of signals to warn each other when Richard was around. Karen kept them informed about Richard's schedule and meetings. Even some day shift employees had begun quietly sharing their stories. Looking at her growing folder of evidence, Sarah felt a mix of sadness and determination. Sad that so many people had suffered in silence, but determined to make sure it ended. The night shift wasn't just cleaning the building anymore. They were working to clean up something much more important. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she sat in the small conference room, waiting for Helena Roberts, the HR director. It was 9 a.m., the first time in years she had been in the building during daylight hours. The folder containing all their evidence lay on the table in front of her, along with the USB drive Lisa had helped her prepare. The door opened and Helena walked in. She was a tall woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and kind eyes behind professional glasses. Sarah had seen her a few times during night shifts, known for checking on the evening staff when she worked late. "Sarah Johnson?" Helena smiled warmly, extending her hand. Thank you for coming in this morning. I understand you wanted to discuss something important. Sarah nodded, straightening in her chair. Lisa had helped her practice this moment over and over. Yes, Ms. Roberts. I need to report ongoing workplace discrimination and harassment by Mr. Richard Webster. Helena's smile faded into a serious expression. She pulled out a notepad and pen. Please, tell me everything. For the next hour, Sarah methodically presented their evidence. She started with the recorded incidents, playing selected audio clips that made Helena's face grow increasingly concerned. Then she showed the pattern of discrimination, the changed job requirements, the dismissed candidates, the missing complaints. This is extensive, Helena said, examining Karen's copied emails. And you say others have experienced similar treatment. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Michael Torres, the night shift supervisor, stepped in. Sorry to interrupt, he said. We heard Sarah was meeting with you today. Behind him stood Juan, Maria, and 3 other employees Sarah recognized from the day shift. Helena looked at the group, then back at Sarah. You all experienced this behavior from Mr. Webster. One by one, they shared their stories. Juan described losing the promotion. Maria talked about being mocked for her accent. A day shift analyst named David explained how Richard had excluded him from client meetings because certain people might make clients uncomfortable. There's more, Sarah said quietly, pulling out Mark's written statement. Some of the executives have witnessed it too. Helena read Mark's account, her frown deepening. When she looked up, her eyes were fierce. Why didn't any of you come to me sooner? We were scared, Maria admitted. Jobs are hard to find, and Richard, he has power. Had power, Helena corrected, standing up. This ends today. She gathered all the evidence into her arms. I need to make some calls. Please, all of you, write down your contact information. And Sarah, she paused at the door. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up. After everyone left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room, feeling drained but relieved. Her phone buzzed, a text from Lisa. How did it go? Before she could reply, Karen rushed in, slightly out of breath. Sarah, Richard's on his way back from his morning meeting. He's furious. Somehow he heard about the HR complaint. Sarah's heart raced, but she remained calm. Lisa had prepared her for this too. It's okay, she said. Everything's documented now. He can't retaliate without making things worse for himself. As if to prove her point, Richard burst into the conference room, his face red with anger. You, he shouted, pointing at Sarah. How dare you spread lies about me? Do you know who I am? I'll have your job for this. But before he could say more, Helena's voice cut through the air like ice. Mr. Webster. She stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 members of the board of directors. My office. Now. Richard's face went from red to white. Helena, this is ridiculous. You can't possibly be taking the word of a cleaner over mine. Actually, one of the board members spoke up. We're taking the word of security cameras, audio recordings, written statements from executives, and dozens of witnesses. He gestured to the door. After you, Mr. Webster. As Richard was led away, Helena turned to Sarah. Go home and rest. Security will make sure you're not bothered. And Sarah? She smiled. I think we'll be having another meeting soon. About your future with the company. Walking out of the building into the bright morning sunlight, Sarah felt as if a heavy weight had lifted from her shoulders. She took out her phone to finally reply to Lisa's text, then changed her mind and called instead. This was news best delivered in person, over their favorite breakfast place. The night shift had taught her patience, attention to detail, and the power of quiet persistence. Now, those same skills had helped her clean up something far more important than any office. She had helped clean up injustice. The next few days at Sterling and Associates buzzed with activity, but not the usual kind. Teams of people from corporate headquarters filled the conference rooms, conducting interviews and reviewing documents. Sarah watched it all unfold during her evening shifts, noticing how Richard's office remained dark and empty. Helena had asked Sarah to maintain her regular schedule while the investigation continued. We want to show everyone that speaking up doesn't mean punishment, she had explained. But things were different now. The same executives who had once looked through Sarah now greeted her by name, and even the most senior managers made eye contact and smiled. On Wednesday evening, as Sarah was cleaning the break room on the executive floor, Karen rushed in. "They're interviewing people from Richard's old company," she whispered excitedly. "Apparently, this isn't the first time he's done this. There were complaints at his last 3 jobs, but they were all buried." Sarah nodded, remembering something her grandmother used to say: "The truth is like a seed. You can bury it, but it always finds a way to grow." The investigation team discovered that Richard had a long history of discrimination that went beyond racist comments. He had systematically prevented minorities from advancing in every company he'd worked for, using subtle tactics that were hard to prove individually. But now, with Sarah's careful documentation and the support of other employees, the pattern was clear. Mark, the executive who had provided his statement, stuck his head into the break room. "Sarah, the board wants to see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Helena asked me to tell you personally." That night, Sarah could barely focus on her cleaning duties. She called Lisa during her break, her hands shaking slightly as she held the phone. "You got this, Mom," Lisa assured her. "Just remember, you did nothing wrong. You just showed them the truth." The next morning, Sarah sat in the main conference room wearing the new blue suit Lisa had insisted on buying for her interviews. The board of directors filed in, led by Helena and a distinguished-looking woman Sarah had never seen before. "Mrs. Johnson," the woman began, "I'm Patricia Chen, CDO of Sterling and Associates. I flew in from New York specifically for this situation." She smiled warmly. "First, I want to thank you for your courage in coming forward." Sarah sat straighter in her chair, her grandmother's words about dignity echoing in her mind. "Our investigation has revealed a pattern of behavior that goes against everything this company stands for," Patricia continued. "Mr. Webster has been terminated, effective immediately. But that's just the beginning of the changes we're making." Helena opened a folder and began explaining the company's new initiatives: mandatory diversity training for all managers, a revised promotion system with clear, objective criteria, and a new anonymous reporting system for workplace harassment. "And speaking of promotions," Patricia added, "we understand you're close to completing your business degree?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Yes, ma'am. 2 more months." "Helena showed me your transcript. A 3.8 GPA while working full-time and raising a daughter? That's impressive." Patricia leaned forward. "We're creating a new position, Night Operations Manager. Full benefits, significant pay increase, and authority over all evening operations. We'd like you to consider taking it once you graduate." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes but held them back. This wasn't just about her anymore. "What about the others?" she asked. "Juan, Maria, and everyone else who spoke up?" Patricia smiled approvingly. "Already in progress. Juan's promotion to security supervisor has been approved. Maria's being moved to a day shift administrative role she applied for last month. And we're reviewing every promotion and hiring decision Richard made in the past 6 months." After the meeting, Sarah stood in the elevator, holding a folder containing her new job offer. The salary was more than triple what she currently made. As the doors opened on her usual floor, she saw her cleaning cart waiting in its familiar spot. 2 more months, she whispered to herself, thinking about her upcoming graduation. But she didn't feel sad about the cleaning work anymore. Each floor she cleaned now felt like a victory lap, proof that dignity and determination could overcome discrimination. That evening, when the night shift arrived, Sarah gathered everyone in the break room. As she shared the news about the changes coming to Sterling and Associates, she watched hope bloom on their faces. The night shift had always been invisible to most of the company, but they had made themselves heard in a way that would create lasting change. "Sometimes," she told them, remembering her grandmother's words, "the strongest light comes from those who work in the dark." 2 months passed quickly at Sterling and Associates. The building felt different now, lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had lifted. Sarah continued her cleaning duties, but everyone knew she was preparing for something bigger. Her textbooks often sat open on her cleaning cart as she studied between tasks, preparing for her final exams. The story of what happened with Richard Webster had spread through the company like wildfire. Some people called it the night shift revolution, how a group of overlooked employees had stood together and created real change. but more importantly, the company's culture was truly transforming. One evening, as Sarah cleaned the conference room, she overheard two executives discussing their latest hiring decisions. They were carefully reviewing each candidate's qualifications, deliberately ignoring names and backgrounds to focus purely on skills and experience. Sarah smiled to herself, remembering how different these conversations had been just months ago. Juan, now the security supervisor, walked his rounds with a new confidence. He had reorganized the entire security schedule to be more efficient and fair to all shifts. When Sarah passed him in the hallway, he proudly showed her the security improvements he'd implemented. "Remember when we were afraid to even speak up?" he asked, adjusting his new supervisor badge. "Now look at us." Maria had transformed too. In her new administrative role, she had already impressed her department head with her organizational skills. She still brought homemade tamales to share during break times, but now she did it for her day shift colleagues too. The biggest surprise came from Mark, the executive who had helped expose Richard's behavior. He had been promoted to head of diversity and inclusion, a new position created by Patricia Chen. His first act was to establish a mentorship program pairing senior executives with promising employees from all backgrounds. One night, Karen called Sarah into Richard's old office. The room had been completely redecorated, waiting for its new occupant, the incoming head of operations, a woman named Dr. Amara Johnson, no relation to Sarah, who had an impressive track record of building inclusive workplace cultures. "Look what I found while cleaning out the last of his files," Karen said, holding up a folder. It contained all the complaints Richard had hidden, the promotions he had blocked, the careers he had stalled. "Should we shred them?" Sarah thought for a moment. "No," she said. "Let's put them in the company archives. Sometimes people need to remember where they came from to know where they're going." As her graduation approached, Sarah worked with Helena to prepare for her new role. They created clear guidelines for night operations, focusing on fair treatment and open communication between shifts. Sarah insisted that every night shift worker should have a clear path for advancement if they wanted it. The night before her graduation ceremony, Sarah's co-workers surprised her with a celebration in the break room. People from all shifts attended, bringing food and small gifts. Michael Torres, who had supported her from the beginning, presented her with a nameplate for her new office. Sarah Johnson, Night Operations Manager. "You know what's funny?" Maria said, serving her famous tamales. "Richard thought he was so much better than us. But look who's getting a degree and a management position, while he's probably struggling to find a new job." Sarah shook her head. "This isn't about Richard anymore," she said. "It's about making sure nobody else has to go through what we did." The surprise party had another unexpected guest. Patricia Chen herself had flown in from New York again. She handed Sarah an envelope containing an additional scholarship for Lisa's law school expenses. "Leaders come from everywhere," Patricia said, addressing the group. "Sometimes they're pushing a mop, sometimes they're sitting in a corner office. What matters is their character and their courage." Later that night, as Sarah did her final rounds as a cleaner, she stopped at each floor, remembering all the nights she had spent here, the late-night study sessions between cleaning tasks, the quiet moments of dignity when Richard had tried to shame her, the gradual building of trust among the night shift workers who had become her second family. Tomorrow, she would walk across a stage and receive her business degree. Next week, she would start her new role, wearing a suit instead of a cleaner's uniform. But Sarah knew she would never forget what she had learned pushing her cleaning cart through these halls. That real change doesn't always come from the top down. Sometimes it rises from the bottom up, one clean floor at a time. 6 months had passed since Sarah Johnson had stepped into her role as night operations manager at Sterling and Associates. Her office, once Richard Webster's domain of discrimination, had become a beacon of hope for employees across all shifts. The walls now displayed her business degree, various employee appreciation awards, and children's drawings from the new company daycare center she had helped establish. One rainy Tuesday evening, Sarah sat in her office reviewing performance reports when Karen knocked on her door. "You're not going to believe who I just saw," Karen said, closing the door behind her. "I was getting coffee at that shop near the mall, and guess who was working behind the counter? Richard Webster." Sarah looked up from her papers, surprised but not gleeful. How did he seem? Angry. Bitter. He was being rude to one of his coworkers. A young black woman. Karen shook her head. Some people never learn. Sarah thought about going to see for herself but decided against it. Her life had moved far beyond Richard Webster, and she had more important things to focus on. Like the mentorship program she was launching next week, designed to help night shift workers pursue their education while maintaining their jobs. Later that evening, Sarah walked through the building doing her rounds, not with a cleaning cart anymore, but with a tablet showing staff schedules and project updates. She stopped at the break room where Vaughn was training 2 new security guards, his supervisor badge gleaming under the lights. Remember, she heard him say, "In this company, we treat everyone with respect, from the CEO to the newest cleaner. That's what makes us different." Maria, now a full-time administrative assistant, was working late organizing a company-wide diversity celebration. She waved Sarah over to show her the plans. "We're calling it Sterling Nights, to honor where the change began," she explained proudly. As Sarah continued her rounds, she passed the cleaning staff, now wearing new uniforms with the company logo and their names properly displayed. Each of them had been given proper training, benefits, and most importantly, respect. 3 of them were already enrolled in college courses through the company's new education assistance program. Near midnight, Sarah received an unexpected video call from Patricia Chen in New York. "Sarah, I wanted you to be the first to know," Patricia began, smiling broadly. "The Sterling and Associates model of workplace transformation is being implemented across all our branches nationwide. Your story, your courage, it's changing thousands of lives." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as Patricia continued. "The board has decided to create a new position, National Director of Workplace Culture and Inclusion. We'd like you to consider taking it." After the call, Sarah stood by the window of her office, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, who was thriving in her second year of law school. "Mom, guess what? My professor used Sterling and Associates as a case study in workplace discrimination law today. I've never been prouder to say that's my mother." The next morning, as Sarah was leaving the building after her shift, she decided to stop by that coffee shop near the mall, not to confront Richard or gloat about her success, but to order coffee from the young black woman Karen had mentioned. When she walked in, she saw Richard behind the counter, looking older and tired in his barista uniform. He glanced up, recognized her, and froze. Sarah stepped up to the counter, made eye contact with the young black barista whose name tag read Joy, and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Joy," she said clearly. "I'd like a vanilla latte, please." Joy grinned back, ignoring Richard's scowl. "Coming right up, ma'am." As Sarah waited for her drink, she noticed the "Help Wanted" assistant manager sign in the window. She pulled out one of her business cards and handed it to Joy. "If you're ever looking for a different opportunity," she said quietly, "Sterling and Associates is always hiring people with potential." Walking back to her car with her latte, Sarah felt at peace. She had proved that success wasn't about putting others down. It was about lifting people up. Richard Webster had tried to make her feel small, but in doing so, he had only revealed his own smallness. That evening, as she prepared for another night at Sterling and Associates, Sarah added one more item to her to-do list. "Start interview process for my replacement as night operations manager." After all, if she was going to take that national position, she needed to make sure she left her current role in capable hands. Perhaps, she thought with a smile, it was time for Joy to learn about night shifts and new beginnings.